The new Bleach TYBW episode looked surprisingly good. Danmachi decided to pop off for no particular reason. We got a new trailer for Shinichiro Watanabe's Lazarus, and I finally got to watch the critically acclaimed Lookback. Welcome back to another episode of This Week in Anime. Not on time yet again, but not that far off either. Make sure to subscribe.
I want to see some movement. I'm seeing enough movement.
The newest episode of Bleach TYBW looked solid, surprisingly so. Now, under different circumstances, I would have made an entire video about the episode, probably, but I just finished making the Dan video, check it out by the way, and making back-to-back dedicated animation breakdowns is too much work. When two noteworthy episodes coincide, I usually cover one and ignore the other. Back when Mob Psycho Season 3 Episode 6 said, the one with Nakamura, Tanaka and more, I didn't talk about it. I instead opted to talk about Chainsaw Man. Similarly, back when Free Run Episode 6 aired, also featuring Nakamura and Tanaka by the way, I didn't cover it. I instead decided to talk about Jujutsu Kaisen. This stuff happens. But since my coverage of Bleach as of late has been quite negative, I felt like I should praise this show whenever I get the chance. And that brings us to this video. Here's a mini animation breakdown of 3 of the most impressive sequences from the newest Bleach episode. The first sequence, which was also the best one in my opinion, was animated by Yuki Sato, who was actually credited as an in-house Pierrot Films animator. Right off the bat, you can tell that the movement is more free, if that makes sense. The characters are moving properly, the movement doesn't feel stiff for the most part, and there's a certain bounce to the motion. Ichigo coming into frame here looks snappy. There's this exaggerated frame of his neck thrown in, which makes the scene feel more energetic and bouncy. Even the full body shots move, and Ichigo's outfit isn't easy to draw. That, coupled with the smoke animation, made this cut really impressive. It's not just the motion, the complexity of the layout stood out to me as well. This shot, for example, contains foreshortening, and this perspective helps convey the energy. Normally, the credit for something like that would go to the storyboard artist, but animator Yuki Sato said that she was allowed to draw the scene any way she wanted, so at least some of the credit should go to her. The shot doesn't end there by the way, the camera rotates and the cut continues, more of that snappiness I talked about. These shots have strong holds and large jumps in between poses. This cut was particularly impressive. It's a full body shot wherein the characters move constantly, and most importantly, this movement makes sense. Ichigo goes for a swing but is forced to defend himself at the last second. He then goes for another swing but is caught off guard and forced to duck, which is why he looks so frustrated in this close-up. It's so good. Sensible combat is rare in anime, and it requires animation of the highest level, and that was available here. Even them bumping shoulders felt heavy, and that's only possible when the scenes and the characters move. It's a great sequence, but I have to point something out, and it has nothing to do with Sato's animation by the way. I hate the compositing work on the blue Quincy powers. I've never been a fan, and the more I look at it, the less I like it. It looks artificial, it looks lifeless and synthetic. It looks like what some people accuse Demon Slayer of looking like. Anyway, let's focus on the positives. The second noteworthy sequence was partially animated by Mitchell Gonzalez, and yet again, the movement was there. Ichigo's motion was a lot more haphazard, but that was the whole idea. He was being bombarded in a random fashion, and the animation conveyed his desperation well. Also, the timing was well done. Those quick cuts didn't mess with the flow, instead, they added to it. Loved this quick, ultra-wide high-angle shot they threw in. It served as a visual buffer between the mid-shots and the close-ups. This cut was amazing. Ichigo's flip and roll looked so lifelike, and that's particularly impressive given his aforementioned difficult-to-draw outfit. The third sequence was more over the top. We got an Itano circus, which is an animation technique where the character or an object is chased by a series of rotating missile-like objects. Unlike the previous two sequences, this wasn't grounded, neither figuratively nor literally, and that's not a bad thing. It feels like a natural escalation. This portion was animated by Takaya Sunagawa, and the movement looks so smooth. A good chunk of this sequence was animated on ones, and it conveyed speed without sacrificing the weight and volume of the characters. This cut was so satisfying to look at. The movement was extremely dynamic and smooth. Also, the background was hand animated, just when you thought this sequence couldn't get any more complex. seasons. This episode was great, even outside of the stuff I talked about. The amount of movement was high, and that's an aspect this arc has lacked since the very beginning. I hope they can keep this up for at least a few more episodes. This section took way too long, so expect the rest of the video to contain my face and no editing whatsoever. Enjoy! Danmachi Season 5 Episode 4, it genuinely caught me off guard. The episode was one of the best looking ones from at least the past couple of seasons, probably more. The drawings, especially during this sequence and near the end, looked breathtaking. The action animation was incredible. This fight was heavily corrected, outright redrawn, and partially animated by action AD and animator Kenichiro Aoki. I assumed he wouldn't do much for this season because of One Punch Man, but it seems like I was incorrect. Plot-wise, I thought this season would be more laid back, but again, I was incorrect. Stuff went down this episode. I'm really excited to see where the show goes from this point on. And speaking of being excited to see where the show goes, that's way too long to be a transition, but who cares? ReZero came through with yet another amazing episode. This entire arc has been as unforgiving and harsh as ever. Also, can someone take a sword off to this man's face, I beg you? And speaking of faces getting blown off, I'm getting better at these transitions. Aren't you glad you didn't click off after the Bleach segment? You're witnessing character growth in real time. Speaking of faces getting blown off, beautiful morphing animation here. Pure eye candy. It's such an amazing show. Let's see what else. Oh, something PNG lock. Look, I won't talk about it. It's like beating a dead horse. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, and to be honest, I have no intention of finding out. It's not like the show ever looked good to begin with. The first season contained a small handful of highlights, and as is customary with literally every anime ever, the second season has a lower production value. There's nothing else worth talking about.
Don't give me hope.
The new Lazarus trailer, it looked great. Mandatory staff overview, it is directed by Shinichiro Watanabe and produced at Studio Mappa, and if that wasn't insane enough, the action scenes are designed by Chad Stahelski of John Wick fame. It seems like the show is destined for greatness, like it has everything it could possibly need, but at the same time, it is an Adult Swim production and they haven't had the best year so far. Both Ninja Kamui and Uzumaki, despite being led by incredibly talented directors, fell apart, and that's concerning. Although, based on what I've heard, Lazarus might be the exception. Production has wrapped up already and things went smoothly enough. Still, you can never be too sure. I have high expectations and I hope I'm not let down.
It's beautiful.
Look Back, the movie that's on everybody's tongue and Twitter timeline. I finally got the opportunity to watch it because Warner Bros. Decided to display an exemplary amount of benevolence and released it in my state in a total of 9 theaters. Let's talk about the movie, and yes, this mini review will contain spoilers. Let's address the elephant in the room first. The visuals. Christ almighty, the visuals. The movie opened up with a top-down animated zoom of an entire city, and right then and there, I knew my eyes were in for a treat. I mean, I knew that already, but you get my point. It looked breathtaking. The drawings, the movement, the expressions, it was close to perfect. Actually, scratch that, it was perfect. It might sound cringe, but at one point, a drawing on screen was so powerful it made me physically recoil in my seat. I know that sounds like something an over-the-top shonen protagonist would do, but it's true. I was hunched forward and I went, I'll tell you which scene it was. It was a low-angle shot. I believe it was a still frame if I remember correctly. It was a frame of Fujino after she became a professional mangaka, drawing with an intense facial expression. She was glaring at a sheet of paper with an open mouth. If you've seen the movie, you probably know what I'm talking about. It was mind-blowing. Of course, the movie was basically constructed from the ground up by Kiyotaka Oshiyama. He was the director, he designed the characters, he drew the storyboards for the entire thing. He was the only animation director. He wrote the screenplay and he animated half the movie. That last bit wasn't hyperbole, by the way. He literally animated half the movie. This is of course not an animation breakdown. I doubt I could make one of those even if I had access to a digital copy of the movie. There's simply too much going on. Let's move on to the story, and I know what you're wondering. Probably pretentious, that's still too long. Did you cry watching the movie? Yes, I did. I wasn't openly bawling or anything. watching, but a single tear did roll down my cheek. Remember that one panel from Chainsaw Man with Makima crying as she watches a movie? That was me, from the right eye too. Thankfully, the entire right side of the theater was empty. By the way, in case you were wondering, it was the scene where Fujino skips and runs home after receiving compliments from Kiyomoto. That one got me. The story was subtle, it was delicate, and it was, to me at least, quite relatable. However, there was one thing that bothered me, one negative in this otherwise sublime audiovisual experience. One chink in the armor, one fly in the ointment, one thorn in the rose. I know a lot of idioms in case you couldn't tell. The movie had one flaw. That is the fact that it suffered from the blue giant syndrome of an overly dramatic third act. The aforementioned subtlety of the story was hit by a truck near the end. See if you can follow me here. Protagonist 1 draws manga and feels a strong sense of pride in her work. Protagonist 1 sees Protagonist 2's work and feels jealous. Protagonist 1 then decides to work hard and improve her abilities, and eventually Protagonist 1 gives up, but then Protagonist 1 receives compliments from Protagonist 2 and decides to pick up the pen again. The two then decide to make manga together until eventually they split off because Protagonist 2 decides to join an art academy to get better. Protagonist 1 unwillingly moves on and does her own thing. Protagonist 2 gets murdered with an axe. You can see the disconnect, can't you? It's too abrupt. At first I thought that whole serial killer angle was just an excuse to get these two together, but apparently not. It is Tatsuki Fujimoto, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised. The movie did do an excellent job of working around it. It did its best to make this plot point feel natural, but at the end of the day, there's only so much it can do. Still, it was an excellent movie, one of my favorites. I would absolutely recommend it. If not for the story, then for the visuals alone, although the two are so closely interlinked that you can't really make that distinction. And that just about does it. I did read and watch a few other works, namely Masaki Yuasa's Inuo and a promising light novel titled Rebuilt World, but I don't think I have the time to cover those. That's about it. Liked the video? Check out this other bit of content on screen. Like and subscribe, and until next time.